There's something hauntingly beautiful about the American highway, the way the sun bleeds into the asphalt at dusk, the old diners with flickering neon lights, the silence that hums just outside the window of a moving van. They took the Rota 66 from Virginia to Arizona, crossing 8 states, through deserts and forests, over mountains, past forgotten gas stations and towns that felt like memories. It was a road that once connected a country, but now it was connecting a woman to her past. Mary never thought she'd take this road, not for him. She was 5 the last time she saw her father. He left in the middle of the night. No note, no warning, just the sound of the screen door closing and then silence. She waited for him at the window every night, for weeks, until eventually she stopped looking, but she never stopped wondering what kind of man walks away from a daughter like that. Years passed, then decades. Life moved on. She became a teacher, then a nurse. She helped other people heal, while something inside her never did. Her mother never spoke of him, not really. Just fragments that Mary collected like broken glass, dangerous to hold, but impossible to discard. A laugh that filled rooms, hands that could fix anything, a shadow that grew longer as the bottles emptied. He loved you, her mother would say on rare occasions, usually after too much wine on Christmas Eve. That was never the problem. But love without presence is just another ghost story. Then came John, the kind of man who didn't ask to be needed. He just was. They met at a hospital fundraiser. Mary was organizing donor tables. John was there because his construction company had built the new pediatric wing. He noticed her before she noticed him, the way she touched people's shoulders when she laughed, how she seemed to listen with her entire body. He had his own scars, deep but quiet. His brother had died young, and John had learned early how to live with grief. I watched him drown, he told Mary on their 3rd date. I was 12, he was 10. The lake was too cold, too deep. I tried to reach him. He never said it was his fault. He didn't have to. Mary recognized the weight he carried, the same one she had been bearing her whole life, the weight of questions without answers. So when Mary told him one night that she had no interest in forgiveness, only in answers, he didn't flinch. And when they bought a second-hand motorhome and began exploring the country together, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could leave the past in the rearview mirror. But it doesn't work that way. The past has its own kind of GPS. It always finds you. It was in Montana, on a morning so cold the windows fogged from the inside, when the letter arrived. From a woman named Linda, her father's sister, a name she hadn't heard since childhood. Mary remembered her vaguely, a woman with copper hair who smelled like cinnamon, who once gave her a snow globe with a tiny ballerina inside. The woman who cried at the kitchen table with her mother the week after her father left. The letter was handwritten, the penmanship shaky but determined. It said he was alive and dying, pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. He was in Bisbee, Arizona, running a tiny bookstore, asking to see her, before it was too late. Mary didn't cry. She just stared at the words like they were in a foreign language. That night she dreamed of him, not as the father she remembered, but as a stranger with familiar eyes, standing in a bookstore surrounded by stories that weren't hers. She threw the letter in the trash, but John retrieved it. He read it carefully. and he didn't say anything. Until that night, when the fire outside their van was down to embers. What if this is your last chance to understand? Mary watched the sparks rise into the darkness. Understanding won't change what happened, she said. John took her hand. No, but it might change what happens next. Mary didn't answer, but the next morning, before the sun rose, they were already heading south. Their journey began in silence. No music, no plans, only the hum of tires on blacktop and the weight of old wounds resurfacing. Mary stared out the window, watching the landscape change. She thought about the last time she saw her father. It was a Tuesday. He had made pancakes for breakfast, shaped like Mickey Mouse. He had kissed her forehead before school and told her to catch some stars for him. A game they played where she would pretend to gather stardust during the day to show him at night. That evening, she had collected a handful of glitter from art class, waited to show him, but he never came home for dinner. By midnight, he was gone. They followed the old Rota 66 through the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, past the flat, empty fields of Oklahoma. In Arkansas, the fog was so thick, Mary said it looked like the world was being erased. Maybe that's what she wanted. They stopped at a gas station where the attendant was an old woman with tattoos covering her arms, faded blue ink telling stories Mary couldn't read. The woman looked at Mary for a long time. "You carrying something? Heavy, honey?" she asked. Mary nodded, surprised by the question. The woman handed her a small wooden token, worn smooth from handling. "My daddy gave me this when I was 9. Said as long as I had it, I'd never be lost. I'm 82 now. Still found my way home every time." Mary tried to refuse, but the woman closed her fingers around it. Some burdens aren't meant to be carried alone. But in Texas, something shifted. They stopped at a diner just off the highway, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. That's where they met Hank, a retired trucker with cloudy eyes and a laugh that shook the room. He overheard their conversation. "You on the road for family?" he asked. John hesitated. Mary nodded. Hank leaned in. "Well, let me tell you this," he said. "Some things ain't meant to stay buried forever." He told them about his own daughter, how they hadn't spoken for 12 years after he missed her wedding because of a bender, how he'd finally gotten sober, but by then she had her own life, her own family. "I thought it was too late," he said. "Then my grandson got sick, real sick, and my daughter called me, not because she forgave me, but because she needed someone who understood fear." He went out to his truck and returned with a box. "I've carried this alternator for 5 years, just in case I met someone who might need it. More than me. They didn't need it, not yet, but they would." When the van broke down outside of Santa Fe, 2 days in the middle of nowhere, with no signal and no shade, the sun was merciless. The desert stretched in every direction like an ocean of sand and scrub. They had water, but not enough. The thermometer inside the van read 103 degrees. John tried to fix it himself, but the problem was beyond his skills. The nearest town was 40 miles away. "We should have checked the van before we left," Mary said, anger rising in her voice. "This whole trip is a mistake?" John didn't argue. He just sat beside her, in the thin strip of shade beside the van. "Maybe," he said finally, "but we're here now." That night they slept under the stars, the van too hot to bear. The desert sky was alive with more stars than Mary had ever seen. It reminded her of the glitter she had collected as a child, waiting to show her father. That's when Mary dreamed again. She was a child, running through a carnival. Her father was there, behind her, laughing. She turned to say something. and he was gone. But this time, the dream continued. She searched for him through the carnival, past funhouse mirrors that stretched and distorted her reflection. She found him sitting on a bench, head in his hands. "Why did you leave?" she asked in the dream. He looked up, his face wet with tears. "Because I was afraid you'd see who I really was." She woke up gasping. The dream felt more real than the road they were stuck on. John held her. "This isn't about him anymore," he whispered. "It's about you." The mechanic finally came. The alternator Hank gave them saved the trip. The mechanic, a woman named Rosie with calloused hands and kind eyes, installed it in less than an hour. "This is an old part," she said, "but sometimes the old ones work better than the new. They're built to last." As they drove away, Mary thought about Hank's words, about things not meant to stay buried, about carrying parts you don't need until someone else does. Sometimes grace shows up before you know you need it. In New Mexico, the terrain turned red, the landscape more alien than anything she'd ever seen. Jagged cliffs, empty skies. They stopped at a roadside stand where a Navajo woman sold jewelry made from turquoise and silver. Mary bought a small pendant shaped like a compass. "For finding your way?" the woman asked. "For remembering the journey," Mary replied, and it was there, on a dusty road to nowhere, that her aunt called again. "There's something you need to know." Mary braced for it. "He's changed. Been sober 15 years. He helps people now, runs a bookshop, volunteers at the shelter." Mary didn't know how to feel. "He has your pictures," Linda continued, "everywhere. Your graduation announcement from the local paper. A clipping about the award you won for nursing. He's followed your life from a distance." "Why didn't he ever reach out?" Mary asked, her voice breaking. "Shame," Linda said simply. "It's a prison with no keys." The man she imagined all her life, a ghost, a villain, a coward, was now, what? A mentor? It felt like someone had switched stories on her. But still, she kept driving. They crossed into Arizona as the sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, purples and oranges that bled into each other like watercolors on wet paper. "No matter what happens." "Tomorrow," John said, "this moment is still beautiful." Mary squeezed his hand. In the months they'd been traveling, she'd come to love him in a deeper way, not just for his kindness, but for his patience, for the way he understood that healing isn't linear. They spent the night in a small motel with a neon cactus flickering outside their window. Mary couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed looking at old photographs she'd brought. Her 5th birthday, the last one with her father. Her high school graduation where she'd scanned the crowd, still looking for him despite herself. Her nursing school pinning ceremony. She wondered which version of herself she would be tomorrow. The abandoned daughter? The angry survivor? Or someone new? Someone she hadn't met yet? Arizona felt like another planet. The sun sharper, the silence heavier. When they arrived in Bisbee, it didn't feel like a destination. It felt like a reckoning. The town was built into the side of a mountain with colorful houses stacked like building blocks. The bookstore was on a narrow street lined with galleries and cafes. "Wayward Books," the sign read. Below it, in smaller letters, "For those who are lost and found." She stepped out of the van and walked up a narrow street, heart pounding. John stayed behind. "This part of the journey is yours," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'll be here when you're done." She stood at the door for a long time, then knocked. He opened it, older, smaller than she remembered, but the eyes were the same. blue, like hers. Creased at the corners from years of sun and smiling and crying. "Mary?" he asked, and then he cried. They didn't speak for a full minute. Finally, he invited her in. The air inside the house smelled like cedar and old paper. Books lined every wall. It was a small space, but warm, filled with plants and mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. A cat slept on a windowsill, orange and fat and content. "That's Ernest," he said, following her gaze. As in Hemingway, he showed up one day and never left. The awkwardness hung between them like a curtain. They sat at the kitchen table, and he told her everything, how he'd been young and scared, how addiction had hollowed him out, how he thought leaving was better than staying and hurting her worse. "I was drunk most days," he said. "Angry, dangerous. Your mother was right to keep you from me." "She didn't," Mary said. "You kept yourself. From me." He nodded, accepting this truth without defense. "After I left, I went further down. Homeless for a while, jailed twice. Then one day, I woke up in a hospital, liver failing. Doctor said I had maybe a year if I kept drinking. He showed her a sobriety chip. 15 years. I got help, found OI, started rebuilding. But by then, so much time had passed. I thought, I convinced myself, that coming back would only hurt you more. How he hated himself for it, every single day." Mary listened, not just with her ears, but with every part of her that had waited for this moment. Then she spoke. She told him what it was like to grow up with a hole where a father should be. The birthdays, the school dances, the men she couldn't trust, the anger, the shame. "I used to make up stories," she said, "that you were a secret agent, that you had amnesia, that you were looking for me but couldn't find me." Her voice broke. "The truth was worse than anything I could imagine. You just didn't want me enough to stay." He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And then he brought out the box. Dozens of letters. From rehab. From jail. From the bookstore. Letters he'd written but never mailed. Each one started with her name. Each one said he loved her, that he prayed she was happy, that he wished she could forgive him someday. "I didn't send them," he said, "because I thought I didn't deserve to." She broke, and so did he. They spent 2 days together. They laughed, they cried, they watched old home videos he somehow kept. He showed her the bookstore, introduced her to regular customers who greeted him with genuine affection. She watched him help a young boy find just the right book, kneeling down to meet the child's eyes as they discussed dragons and adventures. "This is what saved me," he told her, "stories, the possibility of different endings." He gave her a photograph of them from when she was 4. She was smiling. He was looking at her like she was the entire universe. "I want you to know," he said on the last night, "that I don't expect forgiveness. That's not why I asked to see you." "Then why?" Mary asked. "Because you deserve the truth, and because—" His voice caught. "I needed to tell you that the worst mistake of my life wasn't about you. It was never about you not being enough." On the morning they were set to leave, he gave her a book, a first edition of The Little Prince. "For when you have children of your own," he said, "so they'll know that what is essential is invisible to the eye." Mary hadn't told him she was 3 months pregnant. Somehow, he knew they promised to stay in touch. Not as father and daughter, that relationship was lost to time, but as something new, something honest. As Mary and John prepared to leave, her father handed John a small carved wooden box. "For the road ahead," he said. Inside was a compass, old but polished to a shine. "It doesn't always point north," he explained. "It points to what you need most, at least That's what I choose to believe. And then it was time to go. On the drive back, Mary watched the sun set over the red rocks of Arizona. They took a different route home, not the historic highway, but smaller roads less traveled. They stopped in a small town in Colorado where a festival was happening. Children ran with sparklers as a band played folk music in the town square. Mary and John danced under paper lanterns, her head on his shoulder. "I feel different," she said. "You are," he replied. In Nebraska, they visited a pioneer museum. Mary stood for a long time looking at a display of letters written by women who had traveled west, leaving everything familiar behind. They were so brave, she told John. "So are you," he said. In Illinois, they picked apples in an orchard and talked about names for their child, about the nursery they would build, about the stories they would tell. As they crossed back into Virginia, the familiar landscape welcomed them home, but home felt different now, expanded somehow. She turned to John and said, "I thought this would destroy me, but it made me whole," he smiled. "No road is easy," he said, "but the hardest ones are usually the ones worth taking." 3 months later, Mary received a package. Inside was a handmade quilt, pieced together from fabrics in desert colors, reds and oranges and purples, and a note, "For the journey ahead, with love, Dad." She ran her hands over the stitches, thinking about how many hours it must have taken, how each piece was different but somehow belonged with the others. When her daughter was born in spring, they named her Sky, for the endless Arizona horizon, for possibilities, for the space between stars. And when Sky was old enough to understand, Mary would tell her about the road that led to her, about forgiveness that comes not in a single moment, but in 1,000 small choices, about how healing sometimes requires movement, across states, across years, across the distances we create within ourselves. If you've ever held on to pain that felt like it would never end, if there's someone in your life you never thought you could face again, maybe it's not too late. Maybe the road is still open, because sometimes the journey back is actually the journey forward. And sometimes what we're really looking for isn't an answer, but a way to live with the questions. The road isn't just where we go, it's how we heal.